everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a review of the Loki season finale for All Time Always. Now there will be spoilers in this review, so if you haven't yet caught up with all the episodes throughout the entire series, I advise you to go away, catch up with all the episodes and then come back to this overall review. Now just to previously recap on the previous episode, we had a lot of action and spectacle as Loki found himself in the void after being pruned, coming across several other alternative versions of Loki. This is where he found Agent Mobius and Sylvie, still alive of course, and they all work together to take on the Aloith, a cloud monster who consumes everybody who's been set within the void. The episode ended with Sylvie and Loki defeating the Aloith and walking forward onto the next destination. So we move on to the current episode of the finale, and it opened up with previous moments of the MCU in terms of an audio clip, so you could hear various lines and famous quotes from all of the previous films. We heard the likes of Chadwick Boseman's Panther, we heard lines from Thor and Black Widow and Iron Man and Captain America as we were coming in and out of the various intros. And then we had the various skyline shot of what I presume was the singular timeline at the time within the universe, and obviously we are delving very much more with alternate timelines and time variants throughout this entire series. And then we see Sylvie and Loki coming up to the Citadel of Time, and they encounter what is essentially Kang the Conqueror. Now, of course, if you've been following a lot the background information surrounding this show and indeed the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's been hinted for a long time now that Kang the Conqueror will be appearing at some stage. I think they actually confirmed his role for Ant-Man and the Wasp 3 Quantumania as well. So this is just a very introduction to a certain version of Kang the Conqueror than what we saw through the episode. And this is where the episode really centered around for the most of its narrative. Now, we did get a bit of detours where we focused on Mobius and he was talking to Renslayer here, but these scenes weren't really that important, as where we saw the BB-15 guard going back to 2018 to meet the original Renslayer before she became obviously the judge of the Time Variant Authority. But as I mentioned before, the bulk of this episode centered primarily through Sylvie and Loki talking to a version of Kang the Conqueror, and this was a very protracted scene where we essentially get a lot of exposition and backstory into his character, where he talks about knowing events before they happened. We had this back and forth where Sylvie was trying to constantly stab him and he was able to move out the way, and that's because he could see her strikes coming before they actually happened. He essentially established that he's a variant from the early 31st century and how he had spent a lot of time establishing a singular timeline, preventing the multiversal war. He created the Time Variant Authority to prevent any variants disrupting the timeline. Now, we know this because this was hinted at very much in the first episode of the show. And he overall states that he's tired of maintaining a singular timeline and he wants Loki and Sylvie to take over his job. And then Sylvie was again trying to attempt to kill him. She gets into a fight with Loki, who's trying to calm her down because he overall believes the story of this Kang the Conqueror, and he's more concerned about what will happen within the universe because essentially they're both given an ultimatum. They can either take over his position and maintain the singular timeline, or if they kill him, then it will disrupt the timeline and we will end up having multiversal timelines branching through space and time. Eventually it seems like Loki has calmed down Sylvie, but she goes on to strike down this Kang the Conqueror, and that results of course in the timelines branching overall. And I originally questioned this because Sylvie was too rash and too headstrong. Yes, okay, we get her motivations behind this, but you think she'd at least consider the consequences of her actions, but no, she's too headstrong at this point and just kills him quickly without even considering what's going on, despite Loki's attempt trying to reason with her. Now, shortly after that, she sends Loki back into the Time Variant Authority. He walks around the various offices and he comes back to meet Morbius at the time, and he thinks everything's back to normal. He initially warns them of the impending threat that has been going on since Sylvie's actions, and then we get the revelation that Morbius doesn't know who he is. So Loki looks very confused, and then he walks over and then he sees the statue of Kang there. This indicates that he's very much in a alternate timeline where essentially now Kang is controlling the Time Variant Authority. If we go back to the beginning of this series, we saw that the statues were of the 3 Tom Keepers. So that's what's changed in terms of Loki's situation, and that the fact now he's very much in a different timeline or very much in a different universe. And then the episode ended, and then we quickly got an end credit scene essentially indicating that there will be a season 2 of the show. Now, overall, I have to say this was an extremely flat and underwhelming finale for what for me has been a very disappointing series overall. Throughout this show, I've been struggling to really get a grip on the core storyline of this show and what's it about and what's really driving the story forward. It's not that elements were overall convoluted or confusing, I just couldn't get a grip of any particular plot narrative that was really exciting me or enticing me to find out what would happen from episode to episode. And this finale overall did nothing to convince me of that otherwise. It's essentially one long scene where we introduce Kang the Conqueror, or a version of the character. We get some really protracted and prolonged exposition and references to the multiverse, as we all knew that was the plan from the beginning, because we know, taking an overall view from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we know the multiverse is coming from the likes of Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. We know that Kang the Conqueror will be appearing in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, so we know the background version of what's going on within the show. But basically that was it in terms of this episode. There was no final culminating arc for Loki, there was no resolution with his relationship with Sylvie, there was no resolution in terms of Agent Mobius. The real interesting concept of the Timekeepers and variants has never been fully realised for me, and this finale emphasised that a lot. We then have to talk about the Kang the Conqueror character here, or as they were referring throughout the episode, He Who Remains. But the actor Jonathan Majors, who played the character, and to be honest, I was very mixed overall in terms of his performance. I just felt a lot of it was off. The kind of humour that he was trying to project didn't really land, and where we had such a protracted scene, it really got frustrating overall in terms of his overall character and his personality. I think had this scene where he's explaining himself been broken up and we had a back and forth between other characters within the Time Variant Authority, it wouldn't have been as bad. But we just stayed so long with this character, and it just really didn't work for me, the kind of personality and the banter that he was trying to project through the character. I don't think this is really fault of the actor overall. I think this is more a fault of the writers and how they wanted to create this version of the character. Now, of course, everybody can hint and say, well, this is only an alternate version of Kang the Conqueror. We'll get the real deal later on within the movies. But again, you're kind of watching this show on an individual basis, and Marvel tends to do this a lot. They did this, of course, with the Mandarin, where they gave us the more jokey version with the Ben Kingsley character, and then later on they promised that we'll get the real version of the Mandarin. We assume that's what will happen in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. So I wasn't overly convinced by this Kang the Conqueror as a character. Now, going back to this episode overall, normally a finale is the most, or should be the most spectacular, the most action-packed and climatic of the series. Now, this episode, it was actually the reverse. This was actually the least eventful episode of the show. We get overlong exposition from Kang, and we get an unnecessary fight between Loki and Sylvie that really didn't go anywhere. And that was it. There was no other real pulsating drive or real momentum throughout the episode. And for me, it just felt like a lot of unnecessary filler. You know, I've thought that a lot about other episodes within this show, but for it to be the finale as well, to be so one note and unworthy in terms of the overall series, it just really left a big disappointment to me overall. Now, many will say that the season finale doesn't necessarily have to be action-packed or spectacular. No, that's true. But I think it should be the most pivotal, the most impactful, the most dramatic episode of any series, and it should really get you hooked and excited for what should go on within ongoing seasons after that. And I almost couldn't believe how this episode ended, with Loki just staring at the statue, and at that point I was quite getting involved in the story, because I thought, okay, we're getting a bit more of a mystery here and it seems to be quite compelling. And then it just cut to the credits, so you really felt shortchanged about what happened with this overall episode. I just think it was really sloppily handled. Now, everybody will talk about how this links potentially to the upcoming movies, as I mentioned before, and that this is indeed the start of the multiverse. But you have to understand, we are reviewing Loki's story here. This is Loki in its own individual set series. We are not concerned yet about what's going on within the future timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think you have to treat these shows, despite the fact they're of course part of the original universe, you have to treat them as their own singular entity and review them as you would view any show, on its own merit. I always stated that if any show or any movie has to rely on future content in order to supplement its story, then it's done a failure. And I think sadly that's the case with Loki. If you're telling me that the prior purpose of this show was to indeed set up the multiverse, then why did we need 6 episodes? We could have literally had a 70 to 80 minute episode that was 1/3 Loki, 1/3 about Sylvie and the alternate Lokis that we had in the 4th, 5th episodes, and then we could have had the last 20 minutes setting up the multiverse. We didn't need the whole series based around this character, when really the main goal of the show was to set up the multiverse. In terms of the overall show itself, because of this finale, it really feels like such a worthless show, such an important entry within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You know, we look at the previous 2 shows, WandaVision and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, both of those shows had their issues, and I'll probably expand on that in another video, but at the very least, we had some really interesting questions regarding the final episodes and the end credit scenes that were following those particular finales. But we didn't get that. Like I said before, all it is really is a tantalizing tease as to what's coming forward. Now, if you didn't know anything about the multiverse, you wouldn't be really excited about how this episode ended at all, because it doesn't leave anything to get you excited about in terms of following ahead for the 2nd season. And that's why I felt it really fell flat overall. Now, initially, I was very excited about Loki because I thought that it'll be a very interesting show because we're following the journey from a villain's perspective. So it wouldn't be your typical superhero who puts on their costume and goes out to fight evil. I thought we were going to get a very much of a barnstorming, crazy chase across various time periods where Loki was having his own ambitions and agenda, and you would indeed have the Time Variant Authority or some other organisation trying to stop him as Loki's trying to cause all of this chaos as well as furthering his own agendas. That's what I thought the show we were going to get. That's why I was initially very interested, and that's certainly what the trailers hinted at, but sadly we didn't get that in my own personal opinion. And as I mentioned before, it just seems like one big setup for future projects to come, and I think again that's doing a very much of a disservice to the character. I think Tom Hiddleston is great in the role as Loki, very charismatic, very energy, but if you look at it here, he was very much of that more stoic, somber personality, and I think over the course of the season we're taking away a lot of what made Loki so special. So gone are the kind of mischievous antics of the character, and here he's a much more reflective and a much more remorseful personality, talking about how he wants to settle down and he doesn't want to do all this actions anymore. And to me, I think you're taking away a lot of the sprightliness away from the character, and I think that was a detriment to not only the character but a detriment to the show overall. And that was one of my biggest issues along with this finale, is that it didn't really show Loki in his best light overall, and regarding the fact that there was a real lack of urgency and momentum, and the fact that we had such a prolonged exposition from a character that I found a bit annoying overall. And that's why I felt this finale was disappointing, and as I mentioned before, it's real disappointing show overall. I would say it's the weakest of the 3 in terms of the Disney Plus shows going ahead. So if we indeed get a season 2, and it's also been confirmed that Loki is going to appear in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, so maybe he might make an appearance in Ant-Man and the Wasp 3 as well, if indeed we're going to see Kang the Conqueror. So it'll be interesting to see where they take that going forward. But in terms of this overall finale, just very disappointing, very flat. It just gave that point that it was really unnecessary in terms of the whole show. If that was your end goal, just to set up the multiverse, I just think there could have been so much more potential that they could have fully utilised here. So those are my thoughts and feelings on the review of the season finale of Loki. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Were you very excited about the potential stories and avenues that we got going ahead for the multiverse? Or do you feel that it took away from the individual character and that this finale was very flat and very light on the action and the intensity? Certainly that what we saw from the previous episode that had a lot of the action and the spectacle and was a far more eventful installment overall. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I will also do an additional video very shortly when I comment on all 3 of the MCU Disney Plus shows and just give an overall commentary on how they did overall in terms of their performance. Now, you can check out previous reviews of both WandaVision and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier on my channel, and I will leave the links for those in the description as well. Please also like those subscription and notification and like buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.